Welcome to our podcast, Spiritual Dimensions in Therapy. This is a podcast where we're exploring personal transformation and evolving landscape of holistic therapy. Today episode we called Intuition, Synchronicity, and Extraordinary Experiences. And we would like to talk about this very interesting topic with you. And maybe before we dive deeper, we probably need to define what do we mean by word synchronicity. So synchronicity is often described as meaningful connections between our inner experiences. It can be dreams, visions, sensations, and the outer world around us. Things that's happening or about to happen, but might be like outside of the awareness of our logical mind. Those things might be seemingly unrelated, right? But when we see an expression of this vision and dream in the outside world, it's often surprising for us, and we see a certain deeper meaning in this.
Yeah. And when we talk about synchronicity, it's something that many of us have personally encountered, even though we didn't call it that at the time sometimes. So many, we'll talk about some statistics later about how frequent and common this actually is. I'm kind of curious, have you ever had one of those experiences, Lana?
Or absolutely. I feel kind of that my life is full of synchronicities. And just not so long time ago, I had a moment when I had this need to call my brother, right? We're not, he lives in another country. We're not talking very frequently to each other, but I had this like a very specific need to call and check about our parents' apartment. And in this conversation with him, I just asked, are you sure there is no water leak in this apartment? And he kind of like laughed a little bit and said, like, everything is fine. And the next day, I got a text message from him, and he said, it was a good, intuitive question on your side, because neighbors called us and said there is leaking and in this apartment.
Wow.
So I don't know why I asked about the water leak. There was no reason, and nobody living in this place right now. But apparently, I was just compelled to do it. And
Mhm.
it was very profound, seeing this synchronicity.
Yeah, absolutely. And did that come to you in the form of like a vision or just a knowing or just a instant?
It's almost like, the first that came like, maybe I should call my brother, and it's always like a reason to discuss something, right, with our siblings. And when I was talking to him, I suddenly felt compelled to ask about apartment and water leak. And it's almost like it was all happening organically, but it was absolutely not planned. When I was dialing his number, I didn't know I would be asking this question. So
Right.
it's even hard to explain, right? It's just,
Yeah,
yeah, it just came into conversation suddenly.
that's really a perfect example. That's a perfect example. And
Yes,
feeling, yeah, that sudden, unplanned, you didn't think about it. Sometimes it's unrelated things that just like, oh, well, if this, you thought this bad thing was going to happen to you, and then bam, that didn't happen,
right,
the synchronicity wouldn't have happened. And
right.
I have a story. Is it okay if I share it?
Oh, absolutely. I just was about to ask you, Kim.
Okay, yeah. And this is
Yeah.
actually, oh gosh, I have several I could share, but this one actually is my father's story, which I know, he's given me approval to share it. He had planned a genealogy trip out to find where his great grandparents had lived out in Idaho, and Boise, Idaho, and and my dad lives in Michigan. And they were ready to go on the trip, my mother and father, and then my dad came down with a very serious case of shingles, so much that it paralyzed part of his face. He lost some of his hearing. He had Bell's palsy, wasn't able to move side of his face. So get your shingles vaccines. uh, he, but yeah, it was pretty bad. And anyway, he had to postpone that trip for a whole year. And he was so upset by that, lots of, it was very difficult for him.
Mhm.
And so a year later, he went out. And the day they got there, they drove into the town, I think it's a suburb, went to the historical museum, mentioned the family name, and the person working at the historian said, "Oh, just just this past week, just a few days ago, we received all of this stuff from this person's house, from like the attic. They had passed away and their family cleaned out the house, and it was kind of in the rafters of their basement or attic or something, and it was all of our family information,
Wow.
maps, pictures, so much information that had he come out a year earlier, he would have never found.
Wow.
So that still gives me the
Yes,
goosebumps.
me too. Me too. It's just like the timing of it. Kim, it feels so special.
Yeah.
Thank you for providing this example. And, maybe for some of the listeners, it feels like something like that happens rarely, right? That only few people experience it. But it's not actually true, right? And we're going to talk about this, right? But before we dive into statistics and what does it mean to have those experiences, I just want to say that for us as therapists, it's very important to be open-minded when we encounter those experiences in our lives and when we hear and listen to our clients' stories, because if we are not able to really receive it with an open mind, if we dismiss or minimize those experiences, oftentimes they remain unexamined. And sometimes there are certain guidance or helps that those experiences can provide, not being used, not being utilized.
Hmm.
And there is also a darker side of it, right? Not all synchronicities are happy ones. We provided an example of very good and happy synchronicities, but sometimes synchronicities can come in the form of reminders of something dark and scary or overwhelming. And if those things are dismissed, then it's can even lead to a trauma, right? When a difficult, scary, or overwhelming experience cannot be examined, cannot be integrated.
Hmm. That's an excellent point, Lana. Yeah. 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 And especially sometimes some of these experiences can give us what we call ontological shock. So, like in other words, that your perception of reality is shaken up. Maybe what you thought was true, suddenly you start doubting, kind of a big existential question. What's reality when some of these things happen to you?
Right.
I mean, not all the time, but in some big ones, that could be.
I would say that it's even true, like with happy occurrences, like the first reaction that
Yeah.
logical mind is having, like, wow, what does it mean?
Hmm.
How it can be, right? But then because it's also a helpful experience, you kind of settle into maybe relaxing and saying like, yeah, like even though I don't understand how it works, it's good, right?
Hmm.
But for someone who receives a very overwhelming or unusual information, right? Or that not can be easily incorporated into their lives. For those people, it might be even much more important to have someone who can sit with this experience and follow their guide and follow their lead and try to create a meaning.
Yeah, so it's important that therapists, as you said earlier, not just dismiss these experiences. And I'm thinking about how um, we do come from we have the materialistic approach, and that sometimes can lead us to think, oh, synchronicities are just pure coincidence. And sure, while we don't have to debate that with our clients or drive that point home because that can really be dismissive. But the important thing is, what does it mean to you? What's it mean to that client?
Mhm.
Um, And if that is open in a non-judgmental way, that, as you're saying, Lana, it can help integrate it.
Yes. Yes. And I think maybe it's like this is the right place for us to maybe enlarge this topic of extraordinary experience, right? We provided just one example, such as synchronicity, right? But and maybe it's also good time to tell our listeners that we attended this wonderful conference, right, where many presenters shared their knowledge on this topic. I personally learned a lot, but I would like, Kim, you to little bit like talk about, about what kind of extraordinary experiences people can bring into therapy, and, and how and why it's important for us not just to have an acceptance and knowledge of just one category of extraordinary experiences, but
Mm.
why as a therapist we need to strive to really widen our worldview and understand what other type of extraordinary experiences could mean for us and our clients.
Yeah, it's a great question. And in the presentation that I gave at that conference, I talked about, so that's where I'd like to start, is when we do internal family systems therapy, we kind of discover, if you go deep enough with it, you will discover that your inner world is rich. And that inner world will come to you through what we call the clairs, right? Your sense of knowing, your sense of feeling, your maybe a visual image in your mind, maybe words in your mind. Um, and that's what Jung talked about, that might be the collective unconscious. And so things will come up in that. I've had, as I've mentioned maybe in the past, that we've had, and I talk about in that presentation, which I know is not accessible to the public. We've encountered many different things in a person's inner world, from spirit guides to Greek goddesses to um, you trolls. I don't know, many different things, fairies. But we're not saying those things are like real or observable. We're really helping the person with the meaning, and it's always amazing to me how that meaning really comes through in context. If you look up what does that mean, um, you know, a, a spirit animal, a fox, shows up in someone's
Mhm,
imagination. And if they
mhm,
allow that, it might, what does that fox mean? If I were to look that up, it always fits the situation perfect. It's kind of amazing.
mhm,
Well, that's kind of one area. But other than that, people will also tell you about, times that they've had clairvoyance or precognition about things, sometimes near-death
mhm,
experiences, so where someone has actually died, and out-of-body experiences during like meditation, or maybe it's a
mhm,
dream.
mhm,
Very frequent is contact with the deceased, right? So some mediumship, or and then many very common, right, are strange synchronicities.
mhm,
And which we're talking about today. But people will also talk about ghost stories. They'll tell me
mhm,
about, I've had people tell me about, possibly like, UFOs or alien encounters, but and I never assume that's what it is, or put that in the client's mind that that's what that is.
mhm,
Just kind of let that come out naturally. If that's how they perceive
mhm,
it, that's what's important.
mhm,
What does it mean to them? What's their perception of it?
mhm.
So those are just some. Actually, the categories are very broad, and there's lots of
Right.
things that I didn't even mention, but those are some of the major ones.
Right. And I'm also thinking like how what unites all those categories, we cannot explain them logically. And, our choice as a therapist is either to use it to help, to go into this world with our clients and to help our clients to understand and heal, and oftentimes, have a very profound growing experience, or, kind of like just label and push them aside. And that's what more traditional form of therapy and have been doing for a very long time, right? Because many of those experiences that couldn't be explained easily by our normal emotional and physical states can be labeled as abnormal, right? We can attach diagnostic criteria to this, but what research studies shows that, people who otherwise very well adjusted and don't have any chronic problems can actually have once in a lifetime or several times those anomalous experiences and otherwise be completely healthy emotionally and physically.
That's right. That's right. In fact, we promised to talk about some statistics, right? So, in one research study, 44% of a sample of 226 therapists reported a synchronicity in their work, in their professional work, that really challenged their sense of reality, which we talked about before, kind of that potentially producing that ontological shock.
Mhm.
And then the anomalous experiences. So those are really uncommon experiences, as you said. They deviate from the ordinary experience of reality. And they're really, can bring on a lot of intense emotions. And that's really, there's been a substantial portion of the population. Some surveys show that over 50% of the population have had at least one type in their life.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot. And then one UK survey showed that 37% of respondents reported at least one paranormal experience. So like ghosts, haunting, um, maybe mediumship, those types of things.
Mhm.
In a separate survey, there was 73% of respondents experienced at least something, some strange, coincidence, haunting. Um, so there's some, and there's more studies on that
Mhm.
actually.
Mhm.
Can mention one more in a survey out of the Netherlands. They surveyed 640 mental health practitioners, and half reported that their patients had experienced anomalous experiences. So,
Yeah. And I
that's
can imagine how, like, for someone who hears a statistic for the first time, it can be very surprising because suddenly it feels like it's such a common experience, but we
Mhm.
are not always open to share those things,
Right.
right? With our friends, with our family members, right? We tend to question those things ourselves, and there is a reason for
Absolutely.
it, right?
Yeah.
Because our logical mind, we don't like uncertainty, we don't like things to be unexplained, and don't want to be different, right? We don't want to deviate, right, in any ways to be strange or abnormal, right? So it's like a very strong desire, especially for a person who meets with something unexplained, unusual, unordinary, right? Something that cannot be explained by science easily. It's a very strong desire to really minimize this experience, right?
Mm.
Or try to change a story in our head about, what does it mean? What actually happened?
Yes, yeah. And we want to sleep peacefully at night, right?
Exactly.
Without being afraid.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there are so many things on my mind where we can go from here. But first of all, what I want to add that we are living at this time where there is more people seeking deeper understanding of themselves and world around us. We affecting our world ecology on such a deep level that if we're looking really forward, right, our survival depends on this ability of understand interconnectedness that happens between us, physical world, and maybe there is even a bigger emotional and spiritual place that surrounds this world. So there is more people actually trying psychedelics, and they trying to experience, non-ordinary states of mind and and the main reason for people doing it, not just a recreational reason, but their desire to understand themselves and the world around them.
Mhm.
And it's interesting that, those exceptional experiences, they can be created by psychedelics, but they also can be created by stress. They can be created, they seems to be coming out of nowhere at times. There is like so many different points of entry. But once we had those experiences, which might be deeply spiritual, right? Meeting with guides, mystical experiences, sometimes scary, right? In the end, we as human beings are left with this very important task of integrating those experiences in our life stories, right?
Mhm.
So, what does it mean for me or you, Kim, as a person to have this experience? What does it
Right.
mean? Like, what does it say to us about world around us? What we're gonna do with this, right?
Yeah.
And this is where therapy can help. And um, but when we're working with those extraordinary experiences, oftentimes our language fails us and our logic also fails, right? So we oftentimes need to describe what's happened and how we perceived it in, you know, um, through images, right? Through like a poetic words, through maybe like a body language. So this is where it's very helpful for therapists to utilize, any type of movement, art, somatic therapy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Can't necessarily, as Jung found out, right? You can't
Mhm,
necessarily analyze it through the logical mind.
mhm,
Some analysis and meaning making, which is the integration, right, is
mhm,
helpful to that logical side of the brain to be able to make sense of what's happened to me. So that's what I consider integration. And as you're saying about meaning making, and kind of the more darker, or not sometimes seemingly not positive synchronicities, I have another personal example. And that was, oftentimes people will tell me I look like somebody else that they know. You look just like so and so. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I hear that very frequently.
mhm,
And usually I think it's, they have similar hair, natural
mhm,
curly hair. So usually it's similar hair. And it was about the year 2000. And I was at work in a major corporation, came into the building, and the security guard, she said, her jaw dropped. She was, and she said, my niece looks just like you. And I said, oh, I hear that all the time. And she said, no, no, I'm telling you, she looks just like you. I'm going to bring you a photo and show you. So some weeks passed, and then I saw her again. I came in the door and I got that photo. Do you have a moment? And she brought the photo out. And I was blown away because this time this really did look like me. And I said, wow, she does really look like me when I was 16. And at this time I was about 30, 31, giving away my age here. And anyway, I was stunned and she said, yeah, that's the age she was when she passed away, and that she had died in a car crash.
mhm,
Wow, I was just like, oh, I was so sad. I went back to my desk. And anyway, a few weeks later, I happened to bump into her again, but not at work, but outside. She had a second job, a side hustle over at Walmart at a phone kiosk. And she said, after I saw you that day, I went back in my office and I cried.
mhm,
And I said, oh, I am so sorry to be the person. Here I'm thinking I'm the one
mhm,
reminding her
mhm,
of her grief. And
mhm,
she said, no, 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 no. This was so good. It was so healing. Because she said, because when I saw you, I got to see, I felt like I was seeing what she looked like grown up.
mhm,
Like I finally got to see her grown up. It just
mhm,
brings tears to my eyes. So that was special
mhm,
to her. And she said that was healing and a
mhm,
very positive experience.
mhm,
So I guess a darker experience kind of turned to, there's some positive growth out of that.
mhm. Yeah,
But yeah.
absolutely. And it's like kind of again left leaves us in this place, right? How this person happened to be in the right place in the right time.
Yes, yeah. And it was, I wasn't walking into the building at it was like a midday. I'd been
Mhm.
at another building and I had to come into this one. And she wasn't always the main, security person on
Mhm.
staff. She was someone that worked more in the back office kind of area.
Mhm.
So it all like happened to be there.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to connect what you're saying with maybe this theme or idea that you don't always have scientific logical explanation for this, right? In some areas of life, science evolves, and for example, epigenetics can provide a little bit of explanation of why something like difficult emotional experience that happened to a certain person generations ago, right? Why it can be expressed and experienced in our
Mhm.
life,
Mhm.
right? Through certain
Yeah.
genetic coding, but there are
Yeah.
some things that we cannot really explain. And the only way for us maybe to believe and honor those experiences is by being observant. For me, it was very hard when those first, those synchronicities started happening in my life. It was very hard to make sense of them. And it
Mhm.
kind of was uncomfortable, right, for my logical mind even to notice those things. But I think I was lucky in a sense that they were not scary. So I kind of learned to like them and
Mhm.
relish those experiences. And, first it was synchronicities, later paranormal experiences, right? When, in certain moments, the light would behave differently, right? Kind of flicker or go through like a
Yeah.
very unusual wave pattern,
I've had
right?
that happen.
And, right. And so, and I think I was gradually led into experiencing those things without fear. But it's not true for everybody,
Right.
right? And I also, like the E3 conference that we attended together, really helped me to understand that there are certain things that were easy for me to accept and believe. For example, I really feel my connection with the world of dead for people who deceased.
Mhm.
I can perceive energies on some level, even though I don't have images and words in my head, but I
Yeah.
definitely reading energies. But there are certain things that I would dismiss, right? And it's
Yeah.
like when I hear stories in the past about fairies or aliens, right? Or NLO, like my
Right.
logical brain would say, like, yeah, this is true because we experienced this, but this thing is just probably
Yeah.
just someone's wild imagination. And
Yeah.
it was like very eye-opening for me when I was really, reevaluating those beliefs and realizing, wow, right, those experiences can be very real for other people. And again, I cannot explain why some person seeing fairies or one person, communicating with spirits of the woods, right? And someone just had an encounter with NLO. But, something happened on emotional level in those moments, and for some people it's very life changing and very shocking, and we need to be able as therapists and mental health providers to help people to make sense of
Mhm.
those experiences, and we need to be able to take those emotional experiences seriously, not dismissing them.
Yeah, yeah, and help people integrate that into their spirituality if that's appropriate, or how do they reconcile their spiritual belief or no spiritual belief as you had
Mhm.
to.
Mhm.
Or if you come from a very traditional religion, how do you reconcile this with that?
Right.
Those are all big questions, and yeah, that's where and we do have spiritual competency, training as therapists. Many of us do, right? So,
Right, right. And this is absolutely right. We cannot expect our clients to educate us, right? But we need to be open-minded and we need to be willing to learn about our clients' belief system, right? And so without this knowledge, it would be very hard for us to help them to integrate what happened to them into
mhm.
their lives. So we need to understand where they're coming from. And in many ways, we really don't want to provide our own interpretation and explanation. We really just want to walk alongside of our clients and help them to make meaning of what they experienced or what happened to them, and also to facilitate like a certain sense of agency, right? Because those experiences so big and so unusual, each person, each individual need to decide, right, what it means, why I received this sign, why I received this experience, right? What does it mean for me to be a carrier of this experience in the world?
Mhm.
And when this answer is found, many people, even those who had very difficult emotional encounters with energies or non-human intelligence, even those people, when they find this meaning, they feel it's kind of enlightens, eliminates their past,
Mhm.
and really helps them in many ways to find direction in life.
Yes, yeah. Like think of the pilots and the people working on like the USS Nimitz ship in 2004, people may have seen documentaries on how these UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, how they moved, and that radar and all the all the Navy crew on the ship that had witnessed this, plus the Air Force pilots that had witnessed it, couldn't explain it. And the technology was beyond anything that we've had. So many of them were actually, suffering from PTSD symptoms following that incident.
Mhm.
So, and there's many of those incidences
Mhm.
out
And we
there.
need to recognize there still might be non-believers. I was
Absolutely.
one of those non-believers in the
Yeah.
past. I never had a personal encounter with identified flying object or an alien.
Yeah.
But we
I
also
haven't.
need to recognize that there is a lot of evidence, a lot of, you know, um, personal stories and studies, and Congress just had hearings on this topic not so long time ago. So for those who want to learn more and educate themselves, there is a lot of good information that you
Mhm.
can use.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And there are certainly groups of, well, for training for psychotherapists, we can put a plug in for the E3
Mhm.
Alliance. That's E3 Alliance. It's a, we're just a group of therapists that provide continuing education on it. And then, for people who are experiencers, there are experiencer groups, and I've just cautioned people that some of those groups aren't, I'm hearing stories, they're not always the most ethical, so can be tough to discern what is
Mhm.
a good group for you. So for that,
Maybe, yeah, but because we connected with other practitioners, right, who interested in this subject, maybe we can provide link to the group. I think we know at least one, right, where that's reputable and where people can actually join and share their stories and receive support if they're
yeah,
interested in group environment and group processing.
yes, yeah.
Yeah. I think I do want to mention one more thing. So many of us, counseling therapists and psychologists, when we went to our schools, when we went to our colleges, there is was certain courses offered to us, and very few of us actually encountered trainings on any type of transpersonal psychology. And
Hmm.
what we're discussing in our episodes, what we're talking about, actually pretty much lies into this category.
Yes.
Um, it's an interesting situation because we have research studies on this, we have information on this, but it's not readily available. And if you one of those therapists, or maybe you're just a person interested in therapy, who would like to learn more about this, we could probably recommend books written by Stanislav Grof, right? And there might be some other books and research studies. We can certainly mention them in the end of this episode. But I want to say it's not something new. It's not something unknown, right? It's not just a direction where traditional medicine, traditional psychotherapy and psychiatry were willing to go. And we were trying to fill this gap. We're trying to provide information about books, groups, trainings, and we want to invite people who maybe never thought about this aspect of therapy to really start, evaluating this and maybe opening up more to this idea of welcoming discussions around synchronicities, unusual, exceptional, anomalous experiences in therapy.
Mhm. Thank you, Lana.
Yes. Thank you so much, Kim. I'm so glad that, we share this interest and, we can support each other, our listeners, our clients, in the
Yeah.
search for a deeper meaning. And we will be providing links and we will be providing more information in the notes after this podcast episode.
Yes, yeah, and thank you to any and all who have been listening.
Thank you.